Hello, and welcome back to Bad Canadians. I'm your host, Jared Michael. Here at Bad Canadians, we attempt to understand Canada's contrarians. We believe contrarians are sometimes the only people holding valuable information the rest of society desperately needs. All right, today's guest is Eva Kurilova. She markets herself as Canada's preeminent lesbian. I found her to be sharp, courageous, and a much-needed voice in today's landscape. I think talking honestly about sex versus gender or gay versus queer can come at quite the cost today. The mainstream media seem to have largely abandoned this conversation, and there's one narrative you're supposed to kind of subscribe to, and if you don't, you risk the chance of being labeled hateful. But we're pushing back against that on this show, and this show is all about creating space for people like Eva, people who are thoughtful, kind, and caring, and aren't scared to push back against the status quo. And so, yeah, that's exactly what she came on here and did. And so we, as usual, we kind of covered a lot of topics. We kind of covered gay versus queer, sex versus gender, the rise of queer theory, the medicalization of children, gender-affirming care. We kind of just touched the surface on a lot of issues. So as usual, if anything sparks your curiosity, you found anything challenging or unsettling, I encourage you to dig deeper and just, follow your curiosity. This show is never going to present you and hand you a worldview, but we are trying to help map the terrain a little bit here. Eva is a writer by trade. You can find her work on Substack, and she also shares her thoughts on X. I will share links to both those places in the show notes. I found this conversation, it stuck with me for a long time afterwards. I think there's a lot of value in it, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. And I hope you find something of worth in it as well. Okay, without further ado, Eva Kurilova. Okay, welcome to Bad Canadians, Eva. Very appreciative that you're here.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm happy you wanted to talk to me.
Yeah, well, you seem to have been doing a lot of writing, a lot of thinking, a lot of speaking. I like a lot of the way you approach the matter. I'd like to talk to you about gender and gender versus sex. And I know you talk a lot about children in that space as well. I also like, though, how you talk about individualism versus group identity. But in full disclosure, I know a little bit about you, but I don't know a lot about you. So I pardon any ignorance that might come out in this.
Oh, no worries.
Like, for instance, I know you're a new mother, but how old is it? And is it a daughter?
Yes, it's a daughter. She's 7.5 months.
7.5 months.
Yeah,
okay,
almost
so
8. Yeah.
We're going to get into some pretty heavy topics, so maybe we can just start there for a moment. Like, how's motherhood? You've been thinking about children and talking about that, but now you got some skin in the game here.
Yeah.
Has there been any unexpected surprises as being a new mom? And
I guess I wouldn't say unexpected because it's all expected, but just how intensive it is, really. Yeah. Like, of course, I knew that it was going to be hard. We did, one of the hardest things is when she was 3 months old, we went through a move. So that was like really difficult. But no, obviously it's been wonderful. It's something I've wanted for a really long time. And she's just a joy. It was hard to get away from her to come and do this because she just woke up from a nap. I was like, I gotta go now. I'm sorry. The last couple of days, her development's just through the roof. Like, she's just learning so much, and so it's been lovely. Hard, but like amazing. And I'm so happy. And it's just great because back when I was doing like maybe most of my activism, just being involved in a lot of stuff, I kept saying, oh, I want to be a mom. That's a big reason why I'm speaking out, about this. And I kept thinking to myself, oh man, like I don't want to have to eat my words. I better get this done. And then shortly after, I had appeared on some news channels had played a clip of me saying that I wanted to have a baby. I think it was about a week after that I got pregnant. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
well, congratulations. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, being a parent is just one of those things that you just can't describe to anybody until you are one yourself. And I can remember, my son's 27 now, but I can remember that stage where just like every day it's like, sitting up straight, they're, supporting their head. There's just always a new development. That's, I can remember they're like sitting around dinner tables and just 9-10 heads just staring down at the end of the table watching the little kid, just because they're just captivating.
Oh yeah, she started yesterday. She really started to sit on her own, so that was huge. So we're just amazed. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm super happy for you.
Thank you very much.
Great. So I think I've listened to some of your older talks, and and it sounded like you we're from a different generation. I think I'm probably like, when you were born, I was probably just going through high school, and back when maybe pride was a bit more grassroots and kind of cool and pushing against the institutional pressures. I think we're in a very different place now. But what was your journey like? I think I heard you mention that you kind of knew you were gay, like right out the gate in high school. Maybe weren't open about it, but you would have grown up in a very interesting cultural environment. So did you, the whole gay versus queer thing, how did you navigate that as maybe just how did you enter this, and how did you approach it, and did you struggle with it, or how did you come about to see it?
I think I began to realize my sexuality and came out at just the perfect time, really, because like you said, in your generation it was kind of edgy and kind of against the grain, but by the time I was in high school it was and I went to a Catholic high school, and I'm here in Calgary in Alberta, which is supposed to be just so conservative and terrible and homophobic, but it wasn't the easiest thing, but I didn't feel that it was going to be too hard to do. Like, there was some trepidation, but and it's not like I had a big coming out. It's not like I announced to everyone, but I felt quite comfortable sort of telling my friends, and there was like one friend who didn't take it so well and like stopped talking to me. But I realized pretty young, but like for a while I sort of I tried to have a boyfriend, which I think is fine. Like, I think nowadays kids lock in too early, because I could have known maybe when I was around 12 years old, I started to really have crushes on girls, but I just kept telling myself, well, I just want to be really good friends with them. And then when I was 15, I did have a boyfriend, which didn't last very long, didn't go well. And I think sort of after that, I had to sort of admit to myself that I was a lesbian. But it wasn't like a huge thing. Like I said, acceptance was just really good. 2005, Canada legalized same-sex marriage, so that was actually just before I even came out. So it's not like I felt like I was in a culture that was against me. Like I said, some trepidation, but just normal teenage stuff, right? Angst, right? And so it was just kind of normal. Shortly after that, when I was only 16, I met my now wife. So we've been together for a very long time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think it's been 18 years or something,
Awesome.
More than half of my life. So then because of that, I wasn't really in like the gay scene or like the dating scene or anything. So I think the sort of queer uprising takeover, it kind of caught me by surprise, because I didn't really realize that things were going so far in that direction until one day at 29 or 28, I kind of started thinking about this stuff and realizing, whoa, like trans has become this huge thing. Conversations about sexuality are becoming so convoluted. It isn't just like gay, straight, So I always kind of lament that I feel like we were in a pretty good place where it was accepted, but not overly celebrated. Like I said, I didn't have some kind of coming out party. Nowadays, I'll read articles about little 10-year-olds like celebrating their sexuality, right? But we were accepted, but not pushing it in everyone's faces, I suppose. And now I feel like it's gone so far, and people are so desperate to find reasons to kind of be victimized, even after we've been accepted for all these decades now, that I think there is kind of a backlash, and that's kind of what I'm a little bit concerned about, and that's a lot of what I write about, because I just keep being like, guys, like, we have to stop pushing, or we are going to have a conversation about same-sex marriage again. And it's going to be because the radical left went so far that now people are looking back like, when did all of this craziness start? Why are we sterilizing children now? Is it because we legalized same-sex marriage 20 years ago? So I'm just kind of sad that like it's fine. Like, it's not my life. Like, my life is fine. People accept me. I don't feel threatened or anything. I just feel like it might go downhill. And now that I have a daughter, I worry potentially that by the time she's in school, it's swung back so far that maybe she won't have the easiest time telling people. Like, I have two moms. And I didn't think that's something I'd have to worry about as an adult.
Yeah, there is a real danger there, I think. Yeah. And so a lot of it does seem to be like, there seems to be a lot of lesbians right now that are very adamant they're lesbians and they're not queer. And, and so right there seems to be a bit of a crux of a bit of a disagreement. And so what's at the center of that disagreement? Why are there so many lesbians out there not wanting to be called queer. What's
Well, I think there's not enough of us saying that, but because queer, to me, like, it's just kind of this, to me, the term says queer theory, right? It doesn't really say anything real and concrete about like your sexual orientation. It kind of more denotes your like ideological worldview that you buy into queer theory, which is basically that anything normative is oppressive, essentially. So, heterosexuality is oppressive, being cisgender oppresses, the trans people. It's this kind of victimhood mindset worldview. So in my opinion, if you take that label, like, oh, I'm queer, it's like you're setting yourself against everyone else who's normal and normative. And it's just another reason to, I don't know, just to keep fighting against the cis heteropatriarchy instead of kind of being grateful for how good things are. That's something I talk about a lot, that I'm really grateful. It's not that I think we should all just accept crumbs and be thankful, but things genuinely got really good. Like I'm married. Like so I just kind of, I think a lot of people are upset at the label queer just because it groups us with people who we have nothing really in common with. Like it kind of groups us with, let's say, trans identified men, who that's probably the cohort of people that I have just the least in common with. I feel much more kinship with just like regular old straight men than right. So it insinuates that we're all in this big happy community, and for a lot of us that's just not really the case. It's just the umbrella has grown way too wide to cover this broad range of people that, like my life is just pretty normal, aside from being married to a woman, kind of just trying to live and blend in and be a part of society. And I think the label queer denotes that you don't want to do that.
Right. So you do see it tied into that deeper kind of ideology that, lots of places, and it seems across our culture right now, are tapping into that ideology as a root source of viewing the world and how to approach the world. Yeah,
I think a lot of people who use the label, it's more innocent than that. I don't think they realize it. I think they're just kind of, oh yeah, queer is an umbrella term for all of us kind of minority sexualities and stuff. But it does come with those loaded assumptions, and I think they do implicitly sort of accept that worldview, even if they're not really realizing it. Because I know that I did for a little while.
Yeah, and that's, I think, our challenge is that it's kind of, you're making a bit of an intellectual argument that, requires people to kind of pause and consider. And it feels like we're kind of more in an environment right now of kind of really widespread emotional thinking, where I think where most people are positioned on this right now is they just, are busy with their lives going about it. And this kind of feels like, a new civil rights movement, a new, the pride, the gay marriage, a continuation, and just, we want to be progressive, we want to be tolerant. And so it just feels like this is just more of that, and just wanting to be accepting of people and not have people face discrimination for having gender dysphoria. And it seems, and that's maybe where our one-sided media right now isn't allowing that other voice in.
Yeah.
And so do you see some sort of common ground or some sort of way we can get that intellectual argument past the kind of easy emotional reasoning?
Well, this is something I've been trying to do for 5-6 years.
Right, okay, yeah.
And I'd say I have had people come to me that I've been surprised, that have, let's say, read something I've written or listened to a podcast that actually did say I changed their mind. I think there are some people who are really, really staunchly just like leftist progressive, and they just feel that any deviation from that is just like a betrayal of their tribe. They think conservatives or anything right-leaning or to them conservative is just evil and bad. And I think I don't know if you're ever going to reach those people, though I think it's possible. But I think just everyday people who sort of accept it implicitly, like kind of where I was 6 years ago, like thinking, well, I should be a good progressive. This is the next thing, trans, woohoo, like they have gender dysphoria, they're in a lot of pain. But as soon as I was able to pause and just kind of think about it, that's when I started coming out of it. And I think a lot of people are open to that. Like I have, like I said, had messages from people that surprised me that like, oh, I read your article and I used to be so angry at Danielle Smith, but it made me sort of rethink my stance, and you made some good points. So I think the only thing, my goal has always been just to keep putting it out there and keep writing, and I have like faith that it'll be read by the right people, and those are the people I want to win anyway. If I'm not really trying to convince the ones who are just stuck ideologically. I think they have to come to that themselves. But I think there's a lot of issues that people find common ground on. The sports issue is a huge one. Most regular people realize that that's terribly unfair for men to be in women's sports. I've had just my total normie friends come to me like, oh, did you hear about that guy in women's weightlifting, right? People who otherwise sing the praises of trans women, how brave they are, how much they go through to transition, and then they see that and they're like, oh, that's not fair. And I'm like, yeah, no, it isn't. I've always, like, I don't know, my approach has never been to convince people, but just to more make myself be the person they know has that different opinion. And then when it kind of comes to them and they see a thing that they realize is really unfair or just not right, then they at least know they can come talk to me. So yeah, I don't think it's totally hopeless. Feels that way in Canada, especially with the media and stuff. But nobody in my life has ever really given me too much trouble about this. Even people that I've been surprised about. Like, I've written this before, that it's been harder to come out as like against the gender movement than to come out as a lesbian.
Right, yeah,
because
yeah.
If you talk to people or like more general is I guess more conservative leaning and supporting, that's been very difficult, especially with like kind of my age group and stuff. But eventually a lot of people who I consider level-headed and thoughtful and the kind of people I would want to have on my side tend to get there, from what I've seen. So maybe I'm just optimistic.
Well, that's it. We need to have some hope. And I do think that is a little different than the civil rights movement. And let's say even the idea of women joining the workforce or, gay marriage. I think when people looked at that, it just felt right as time progressed. It's like but in this case, I think the vast majority of people they have concerns about it. They're like, like you mentioned, the sports and, you just have to look as close as your, closest rec center to find some story of some, older man in some bikini ogling some 8-year-old girl in a change room, and and parents complaining to the staff and being told, oh, this is inclusion, and so I think it's not the same as all these other prior movements in that this one doesn't quite feel perfectly aligned, I think, to most people.
It's not. I think a really big example of the difference is that, one of Canada's kind of biggest gay rights organizations, EGAL, I found this article from back in early 2000s, and like the president was defending a pastor's right to call homosexuality like an abomination and like all these terrible things. He was like, we don't agree with him, obviously, but he has the right to say this. But then after that point, the organization started slowly, using the terms hate speech and going after that, especially when they started taking up the trans cause. They started to really go way too radical and not support free speech and to frame these things as hateful and oppressive and stuff. So that was a huge change because the early gay rights movement, there was kind of these two strands. There was the assimilationist movement, which I think is what won out. Like, hey, we're just like you. We want to get married. We want to have families. And that message sold, obviously. It was successful. But there was always a very kind of subversive, radical, no, we're different. No, we are queer. I don't know if they were using that word, but like, we're not like straight society. We're different. We should just have our own. We don't want marriage. And it seems that after the assimilationists kind of won, the other side started to come out kind of under the guise of the trans movement, or the trans movement used that side. And now that's kind of the dominant narrative that like, and I think that's what's causing a lot of tension, because that's very, it asks for special rights, right? It asks for very special rights and considerations, like men using females' changing rooms and in women's sports. And that's not fair. That's just, so I think that's why things are going haywire right now.
Yeah, I know from someone who grew up on the left and was, had a bit of an activist mindset for most of my life. And in the 90s, early 90s, this stuff kind of crept up in a weird way that was similar but different. But at the same time, we were kind of at peak progressiveness then, felt like we had won all these victories, and it does feel like we kind of just abandoned the stations at that point. It was like, hey, we did it, and then just wandered away, and then I think maybe assumed that we didn't have to keep teaching the next generation these things, that we had just like kind of got society to this great place that's just locked in now, and it feels like some real radicals that are a minority kind of moved into those spaces and took over while we were sleeping, and it's an interesting phenomenon. It's I was curious though, you do write a lot about children in this space. And so what are your concerns about children specifically when you look at the new gender ideology and them being raised and exposed to it? What are your worries there?
My concerns in a nutshell are children locking into a trans identity and medicalizing, taking puberty blockers, going onto hormones in their early teens and then eventually surgeries, and losing not only their fertility, but just like probably most of their sexual function, which would hinder adult relationships, which would stop them from ever having a child. And even just on a psychological level, just, getting wrapped up in an identity like that at such a young age. I think, Jazz Jennings is unfortunately a really good example. In my opinion, Jazz was just clearly a gay boy, but who knows? Jazz was very young. He could have grown up anyway, and he got medicalized so early. And this is, when people say this isn't happening, it's like this was televised since, the early 2000s, and it's happening to lots of children. And I think anybody should be concerned about this. I think the reason I specifically am is, as I've said a lot of times, is I feel like if I was growing up today, that's something that I would get really stuck in, that mindset. Like, I think I would really be convinced that I was a boy, especially if teachers were showing us material like the kind that they are in schools today, if therapists were pushing it, if there was gender doctors and clinics that I knew I could go to. So yeah, I got, like, that's one of the very first things that sort of, back in like 2018, I remember sitting my now wife down, and I was like, yeah, I've been hearing about these trans kids, but wouldn't you and I have been basically that? Like, we were both tomboys, we were both so boyish, we had like really masculine coded interests. And like, I could see her kind of pause and think about it, but she was like, no, it's different somehow. And I'm like, yeah, surely it is. And we kind of dropped the topic, but I couldn't really let that go. Like, that's the one thing that I never sat right with me. Like, with sports and stuff, I kept telling myself, well, the organizers know what they're doing, like, surely that's fine. And the trans women are women, yeah, okay. Like, I thought people were just saying that, but they didn't really believe it. They were saying it to be nice. But with kids, that's something I never was able to buy into, and so I think that's what helped get me out of it. And that's been a big focus of my advocacy and writing and activism. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like back to when, I was in high school going through this, it felt like our peak point got to the idea that we got past stereotypes. It was like, you could be a man and wear a dress. You could be a girl and wear coveralls and be a heavy duty mechanic. And that seemed to be where we're at. And then next time I checked in, we seemed to be 180'd on that. And now it's like, oh, look at that girl playing with the dump truck. She's actually a boy. And well, that's really odd. And then I try to push back against that, and people just seem to there's many places I find in this topic, there's just contradictory stuff, like where people just be like, no, that's not happening. And then you look at all the material on how they're judging gender at young ages, and it's what you just said, all coded stereotypical behavior.
That's all it is. Yeah.
Am I wrong on that? Or is that how they're like, what else are they going on other than your 4-year-old saying I'm a boy or I'm a girl? Like, it's, what else can you go on?
That's all they're going on. I mean, first of all, with the affirmation model, there isn't criteria. The kid just says I'm trans, and they're trans, and that's the model that, WPATH, the World Professional Organization of Transgender Health, is pushing, affirmation. So if they go to some gender clinician, then they're supposed to just affirm them and say, yes, you're right, that's your gender identity. If, back when there was some semblance of criteria and gatekeeping and they were using the DSM, it really is basically, it's based on stereotypes. I don't have it memorized, but I went through it once because I was seeing if I would hit the criteria, and I very much would. It was just like, yeah, has typical opposite sex interests, has a lot of opposite sex friends. There was criteria for like discomfort with the body that lasts up to 6 months or something, but what kid going through like puberty doesn't feel a bit odd? Like, it's all things that are just a normal part of growing up, or stereotypes. And so like, yeah, when I went through the criteria, I was like, I would have fit this no problem. Because a lot of people, when I say, well, I would have been a trans kid, they're like, well, you didn't transition, so you can't really say that. And I get it, yeah, it's a hypothetical, but here's the criteria, and here a kid like me, or many, girls today, would totally fit it. And it doesn't matter anyway, because now everyone just gets affirmed. And they'll pretend, well, it's about gender identity, it's your deep-seated feeling of being male or female, but they can't really define it. Like, what is that? It's a different thing to every different activist that you ask. Nobody has a definition. There's no biological basis. Well, I think there is a biological basis for gender nonconformity, but that's not the same thing as having like a different gender identity. And so, no, you're right. It doesn't really go deeper than that. And like, even if I was really to steelman their arguments, it's very hard. The most I could give them is, yes, some people are very uncomfortable in their bodies. They are distressed potentially when they're adults. Like, I don't want to stop adults from pursuing this. I don't really think public health money should go towards it. But like, okay, you're free to make your choices when you're older. I believe that many of them are distressed for many different reasons. But to say it's the same thing in a child is ridiculous, especially because in adults there are so many different reasons why they transition. So I just think the medical establishment has failed really, really badly on this issue, and that's why I was happy when the Alberta government, stepped in. In a perfect world, I wouldn't say the government should interfere with that, but I think the medical establishment failed.
I guess cause no harm is supposed to be the first rule.
Yeah, they have caused a lot of harm.
Yeah, and so we just go back to gender-affirming care for a moment? Could you kind of talk, because, I think in contrast to that, they've kind of redefined, what's that term? Conversion disorder is basically any opposition to gender-affirming care is that right? Is kind of labeled a form of conversion disorder.
Conversion therapy, do you
Conversion
mean?
therapy maybe, and it's seen as bad, that you're basically trying to do like kind of that old school form of conversion therapy to get the gay out of you. They've kind of repurposed that word though, haven't they? To just basically saying if you even pause and your child suggests they're trans and you just pause for a moment and even want them to think about it in any critical way, you are now practicing conversion therapy on your child.
Which in Canada is illegal.
Right.
So Bill C4 or C6 or something passed unanimously, and it was like, the anti-conversion therapy bill, which is kind of a slap in the face of the gay rights movement, because there actually was like gay conversion therapy in the past where, men mostly, I think some women too, would receive like electroshock therapy, while viewing images of other men, and like it was really barbaric, and it was attempts to change their sexuality, which like never worked. And then there was never a gender component of that, because that just wasn't really part of the conversation. And so now it's kind of they've rewritten history and pretended that gender identity was like always a part of that, and so now they've outlawed it. But a lot of therapists are scared to even ask a child, like, why do you feel this way? Why do you want to transition? Maybe you're not really truly trans. Maybe there's a reason for this. A lot of kids, a lot of girls will admit that, I think that if I am become the boy I truly am, I'm going to feel a lot more confident. I'm going to feel a lot more just secure in myself, because they're, going through puberty and they're anxious. And the sad thing is, if they start taking testosterone, they actually might, because it's a steroid. And then it's kind of like a self-fulfilling. They're like, oh, this is correct. This is right for me, because suddenly I feel so outgoing. Suddenly I feel so much better about myself and my body, right? Anyway, we're talking about conversion therapy. But so I do know some therapists in this space, and they do try and work with clients, but there is a fear that even if they try to explore reasons why they might feel confused or distressed about their sexed body that isn't just purely based in gender identity, that they could get in trouble for going there with a client.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So gender affirming care, that's another one of those, I think, where, contradictory things, where I feel like for so long we were being told like this isn't happening, and then suddenly gender affirming care is life-saving, and just if you don't do it, it's these people are going to commit suicide. And
that's a huge thing they always pull. They did that a lot for Danielle Smith. They were just like, she's going to make kids kill themselves, and I just think that that's so nefarious to say, because when you're spreading that message, you are going to actually make impressionable young people feel like, consider that possibility, which is really irresponsible.
Yeah. And so for the record, you believe in the phenomenon of gender dysphoria.
Oh yeah. I think there's no reason to deny that some people, for various reasons, feel incredibly uncomfortable in their body. Right, I think for a lot of the trans-identified men, I think they're autogynephiles, which doesn't make them evil, but they're attracted to the idea of themselves as a woman, and it's essentially a sexual fetish. That's not for all of them. I think some people are just so gender non-conforming, as I was, that develop that discomfort. Like when I started to grow up and develop, it was hard for me. Like I also kind of felt like it shouldn't be, and all women do, but I did kind of, think of myself the way my body was developing. It did feel very odd to me, and it did feel like it would be perhaps more right if it would be going more masculine. But then I went through puberty, and then I accepted myself, and that's the thing. It's like oftentimes the kind of solution to childhood gender dysphoria is to go through puberty and grow up and accept yourself. And so when they do gender affirming care, they pause that.
Right.
Right.
Well, I've heard the claim that a lot of people believe that a lot of these younger trans kids are just gay children who are being pushed into trans because of like everything you're saying, I guess.
I think a good portion of them are. I think there's so many different reasons, which is why it's so irresponsible to just practice affirmation therapy. Because I think some of them are just gay. I think it has been shown a lot of them are autistic, vastly disproportionate. Here in Canada, there's so many more of them are Indigenous. The ones that show up at Canada's gender clinics, I think they make up like 18%, but they make up like 5% of Canada's childhood population, and nobody is asking why. And like 75% girls, they vastly outnumber boys at these gender clinics. And I think if people would just stop to ask themselves these very basic questions, like why these disproportionalities, you could start thinking and you could start having conversation. Like, why are so many more girls than boys born in the wrong body, right? Or why are they more distressed? And the kind of hypothesis of rapid onset gender dysphoria seems to affect girls much more. They seem to be more susceptible to social contagions in their friend groups, just like how anorexia used to be this big thing, and now it kind of seems like that morphed into gender dysphoria, this kind of obsession with your body and with fixing it and with changing it. It seems like that a lot of young girls have fallen into that now.
I guess that's a problem with the gender affirming care model too, is like if there is gender dysphoria as a legit phenomenon on one side of a spectrum of some kind, there is what you just said, the social contagion aspect on the other side, where you do just maybe have, fairly normative kids who are just getting caught up in a social trend and wouldn't otherwise be going through gender dysphoria.
No, they wouldn't. No.
And I can't imagine what it's like, because I'm not gay and I don't have gender dysphoria, and I still feel like I went through I always assumed it was kind of a normal phase in your development as a kid, is just rejecting everything about me and wanting to be something else. Like, I wanted to be something different all the time, until eventually, like you say, you just kind of have to come around and accept yourself. I think that's a normal process, but we seem to have been built a giant off ramp for everybody, and they can actually just take the off ramp now. And we need to build an on ramp.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We do.
And so are you seeing, what's your feelings right now? Are you feeling optimistic, hopeful? The legislation that got passed in Alberta recently, that must have been a little bit of hope.
Yeah, that was really cool. I was supposed to be in the legislature that day, but I had just given birth 10 days prior and had a C-section, so that didn't work out. I was really, really happy when that happened. That felt so good that somebody in Canada was finally doing something. I was really pleased with our government. That's kind of gone downhill a little bit since our federal election. Right. Just to see that, Canada gave the mandate to Liberals again, and it's the Liberal Party that has really pushed a lot of this stuff. Back in 2016, it all started with Bill C-16, which added gender identity and gender expression to the Canadian Human Rights Code with no definitions at all. So it was kind of just left up to people to implement in the worst ways possible. So because they're still in power, I'm feeling a little bit like, are we just taking a bunch of steps backwards? I'm happy to be in Alberta. I think it's going well here. I'm glad the government is, for example, aware of the kind of content that's in schools, of the kind of materials. I'm glad that we've limited what very young children can access in terms of puberty blockers and hormones and stuff. That's fantastic, especially having a young daughter here now. I am still worried about schools. I think they're very, very, very captured by very extreme leftists, and so it's going to be hard to ensure that stuff is fully kind of rooted out. But I don't know, as for the rest of Canada, I'm not too sure if this is really going to change anytime soon, and I'm kind of genuinely worried it's going to go so far that there is going to be a really big backlash one day. hopefully not, but yeah. So kind of like just the other day I was thinking to myself, maybe I'm not so hopeful anymore. But also I'm really tired lately, so maybe it's just that speaking, but there's reasons to be happy for sure.
Yeah. No, it's one thing I think is a difference maker through history is we have the internet this time around, and I don't think if we had the internet, I kind of don't know what the landscape would look like, because it's already hard enough to get independent voices out right now with the ability to do it. I can't imagine if that wasn't even an option, we'd probably all just be drinking the Kool-Aid and doing.
That's so true. Yeah, just watching CBC and accepting whatever they say.
Yeah, not thinking independently. And,
no.
And so when you're talking to young kids today, and especially let's say young people in the queer movement and stuff, like how are you trying to talk to them? What messages do you try to, what new ideas do you try to maybe put in their head?
Well, I would just really caution against having, like a victim mentality. I would just want them to, be individuals, not fall into this kind of like collectivist thinking, because I think a big problem with me is I don't think the queer community is a community. It's more of a collective. It's more of a political collective. You have to it doesn't so much matter your sexuality. Like that was kind of the cool thing about the gay community when it was one, is that what mattered is like, hey, we're all gay, and so but we should be able to have different opinions, and what joins us is we're all same-sex attracted. And obviously it was always probably more progressive and leftist because they were fighting for their rights. But now it's more like it matters less if you're same-sex attracted and more that you have the right politics. And I think that is just so depressing for just an individual's spirit, really, to have to walk in lockstep with these people, or you'll be like, ousted. Because I know some people who just feel totally like I was never part of the community, because like I said, I found my wife so young and we were just together since then. But I think it's not good for just developing as an individual, having individual thought. I think you have to be willing to question things, but it's very scary when your entire social network is other, queer people. And then if you dare to voice one opinion, like maybe about women's sports or something, you could really get just full on canceled. And that's really scary. And it's unfortunate that that's the situation a young person might find themselves in just because they happen to be gay or lesbian, that they can't have their own individual thought. So I just want people to think, like, if your political opinions genuinely fall in line with more leftist progressivism, that's great. But do they really? Like a big part of me kind of coming out of that, I think when I sort of realized the whole gender thing was just crazy, I had to kind of rethink a lot of things that I believe politically. And something I told myself was to just kind of re-find and recapture my sort of natural thoughts on things. Like I remember the first time I ever encountered the concept of like privilege, white privilege, male privilege, I naturally sort of revolted against that. I thought to myself, well, I can do anything. I don't have to be like a man. Like I can write, I can do whatever I want. And like slowly I realized, oh, that's bad. Like I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't voice those things, right? But then when I was coming out of that, I was like, no, actually, I can have my own opinions on various different topics, And so that was very freeing, but also scarier to come out as a non-progressive than even as a lesbian.
What kind of pushback have you experienced with just voicing your independent thoughts?
Well, in my personal life, not a lot. Like I said, I was pleasantly surprised by most people. I was really worried that my younger sisters would give me hell, but that's been okay. Online, lots, of course. People come for me all the time.
What's that look like?
Oh God, well, the worst example was when I a year ago, would have been about a year ago, I posted a photo of my ultrasound, and I said baby turf, because like Baby Shark, the song. Do. And like they lost their minds. Oh my God, this was found by the trans activists, and they were like wishing me miscarriages. They were like just thousands of them piling on. And like it didn't affect me too much. It's all ridiculous. But like, yeah, mostly just online pile-ons. I've done like in person on the street protests and stuff, but people are usually a bit too meek in person. They'll just walk by and like shout something, and it's never anything too crazy. So no, it's been okay. Like I can take the online stuff. If I couldn't, then I should just stop and get off the internet.
Right. And so it seems like from the outside that there is still a bit of a, like, this long schism in in this community. Like I see more and more people writing LGB. And, and then I'm out in Victoria, and, so pride flags come out all the time, and I'm seeing a lot more of the older pride flags.
Are you?
And talking about the muddying the waters. Like, I'm like, I don't know. Is that just some person who just, doesn't want to buy a new flag and it's Pride Month, or is it a statement, and they're pushing back against the new flag? And so I can't even tell now. These flags have become like, I can't tell what it means when I see the old, the old pride
Me
flag.
either.
And I'm seeing like pride parades are falling apart, like, big sponsor. And so
yeah, that's interesting.
Is that schism growing still? Is that happening? Is there an LGB movement reforming in counter to the trans movement? It
is growing, and I would say it's along political lines. I would say it's, the very kind of leftist progressive people are sticking strong, the entire acronym 2S, LGBTQIA, everything. And then, yeah, I think the more just LGB side tends to be, I would say, I guess, more centrist to conservative. It really is more along political lines, in my opinion. The only people, like, let's say in Alberta that I know that are saying that, drop the T or just that everything's gone too far are more conservative, which there are a lot. There are a lot of gay conservatives in Alberta, like, no surprise. Yeah. Lots of people in the UCP, which is pretty cool. So I would say, yeah, unfortunately it has divided along political lines, which is sad because we should all be able to enjoy. Like, I'm not against pride parades, and Calgary's parade really isn't all that horrible. It's kind of more family friendly. And interestingly enough, like, I was at a roundtable discussion last August with the premier and a few other people, and someone kind of floated the idea of doing like our own kind of conservative pride parade. And, she just said, like, well, I would hate to further that division, like it, pride shouldn't be so political, but it is. Yeah. And she said this after, Pride Calgary, or was it Pride Edmonton, had banned the UCP. Like, they literally banned the Conservative Party, even though every other party marches. Yeah. So, like, talk about who's really being divisive here, because they would say, well, the homophobic Conservatives, they're so divisive, they hate us. When our premier, who is constantly accused of these terrible things, didn't want to do that, because she was like, well, I don't want to separate you guys even further. Right? Yeah. So that was kind of nice to see. So yeah, there is a deep divide, and I would just say the trans issue is a big one, and then just in general, it's going along political lines for sure.
Well, I guess because like you say, that ideology is political at nature, and so I think that ideology has politicized everything it's touched through all our institutions, and so and just trying to be neutral is they see as right wing and white supremacist.
That's true.
Just trying to have neutral principles in our institutions.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I'd like to see go back to having if we're going to have a pride parade, have a nonpartisan, everybody's welcome parade.
And one day, just one day, not a whole season. Let's have a parade. That's fine. We won. We can celebrate that we're in a good place, but it lasts forever. Calgary doesn't happen until September, so it's like a whole Pride season, and people are sick of it, right? Because it's in their faces all the time.
Well, like you say, like the original Pride was just all about, like, you're the ones who are making us feel different. We just want to be the same as everybody else and be able to, join the party. And now it's very more adversarial. But you mentioned earlier, just like, what's with the rise of the sexualization? Like, what's with I find it really fascinating that, like, kink and weird kinks and weird sexual are going into like school libraries and into children's books and at children's displays and at children's events. Like, what's going on there? Why is that happening? And why is the movement pushing that? And why do they want to push it?
Well, I think that is the queers, essentially. It's how kind of the queer theory branch of the movement, the one that didn't want to assimilate, the one that wanted to be different and fight against every normative thing, that's the one that kind of, after gay marriage was legalized, and I would say not in Canada but in the States, after that was legalized, then the whole kind of apparatus changed to kind of being overtaken by these queer theory ideologues. And to them, I mean, it does get kind of dark, because I think they try to, like, everything normative is bad, and so is just things like the typical family, or just like normative schools, and so they have to kind of get in there and like problematize everything. I wrote an article once about kind of the drag queen story time, the paper that kind of sparked it all, and it was called like Oh, I forget, but I dissected the whole article, and it's all about like getting in there and like disturbing and disrupting normal family and school relations, and like showing the kids like a queer family. And nothing about it was overtly like pedophilic and sexual, but when you're talking about essentially, corrupting minors, you kind of start to go there, and you see it with the weird materials that's in schools. And it's unfortunate because people try to trace this back to gay marriage, but I would say we had like a good decade where, okay, gay marriage was legalized, and it's not like you could find this kind of content in schools. It started happening when they started pushing to teach about gender identity. Mm-hmm. But because they wanted to do that, they glommed it onto sexual orientation, and it became SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity. And then somehow that material was put in there, and I don't want to think it was nefarious, but like, what else was it, right? Like, yeah, because they're trying to tell children at very young ages, even as young as 5, that you have a gender identity. But then they're also telling them you have a sexual orientation. But that requires actually having sexual thoughts and feelings, and so that's where you get into very murky territory.
Right, yeah. Well, and some of the stuff's even like hitting kids before they've even gone through puberty, and which seems really, how much are they processing that? But it's just, yeah.
No, it just confuses them. It makes kids super confused. They don't understand. They've never been, like, I've heard stories from parents of like their young child will come home, 8-year-old boy or something, and be distressed because I don't know what my sexual orientation is. I don't have feelings for boys or girls, and it's like, it's okay, relax. Like, you shouldn't yet.
Myself. Yeah, right? A really smart kid I knew who just like going through school and very intelligent, and they didn't know, they wanted to grow up to be a man. They were a boy, and they were really distressed because they weren't sure if they were going to be a man when they grew up, and their mother was trying to say, well, of course you're a boy, blah, blah, blah. You have a penis, you have that. And he's like, no, you don't get it, Mom. Like, that doesn't matter. Only I know if I'm, but what, and he's given no criteria other than, so. And so, yeah, we're just like, in order to address the small percentage of children that have legit gender dysphoria or struggling, we've just decided to confuse everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And like equal the playing field that way,
That's right. Make everyone confused.
Yeah. It seems like an interesting strategy. It's so when you're going out, how do you feel like people in your movement, how do you think you're like the most commonly misunderstood? How do you think you guys are?
I guess it's just like hateful bigots, transphobes, right? I've been accused of being a homophobe very many times, even a racist. Mischaracterized as transphobes, essentially, that we just hate trans people for no reason, irrational fear, that is just like plain old bigotry, which of course is just completely wrong. I think there are legitimate, I guess, transphobes, but I think people who are genuinely transphobic is just people who hate people who are gender nonconforming, essentially. Right. I mean, I'm the furthest thing. Like, it's so funny because actually a lot of people on my own side have a huge problem with me because I do have a very good trans friend. And I don't hate people who identify as trans just because. That's not ever going to be the reason that I don't like someone. Right. It's going to be because of whatever ideology they're pushing, which granted is a lot of them that are pushing to, talk to kids about these topics and things like that. But if there's a lot of people involved in the pushback who are trans or trans identified. So I see no reason to be hateful towards them. And so I find myself in an interesting spot where I sort of make everybody angry sometimes.
Yeah, I saw that you kind of went through cancellation from your people that you thought were kind of on your side.
Which time? There's been so many times.
Okay, I heard about it maybe a year ago. You got in hot water for maybe using the wrong pronouns for your trans friend, according to a certain amount of people. And I thought that's another reason I was like, oh, this is going to be an interesting person to talk to, because when someone's getting it from both sides like that, that's usually somebody defending a principle and, and not just trying to be right and shove their ideology down your throat, And so what happened there? What's the story?
Well, the last cancellation attempt was literally the day I gave birth. I don't think that the person who was going for me knew that at the time, but I'm like in the hospital bed and I kind of just checked Twitter the day after and I'm like, what is happening here? All of that is because, mostly because of my very good friend Lois, who is a transsexual and who is male, but I do call she and her just because I know Lois is a man, but this is just my friend and I have no problem with that. I would never like deceive anyone about my friend's sex, but Lois has been very much involved in the pushback against this stuff, especially the medicalization of minors. And so we've gotten to know each other over this topic and doing activism together and just being friends. Lois was my maid of honor at my wedding as well. And so this has been going on for maybe a couple years now. Every few months, somebody kind of catches wind that we're friends and that I have a friend like this. And so a whole bunch of people get really, really angry and come for me and post screenshots of me talking about Lois as if I don't know my own words or photos of us together. And then I try not to give it too much air on Twitter. I'll write about it sometimes because it's an interesting position to be in. But so that's what's funny when people accuse me of just like being transphobic, because I'm like, my own side cancels me like every few months because I'm not transphobic enough. So no, I like people for being individuals. I don't. I try to just let people kind of show themselves to me and not have preconceived notions. And just because they transition for whatever reason doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person or are pushing for these things. Lois and lots of other trans people I know, they don't agree with men and women's sports or prisons or private spaces. They're on our side with all of that. They chose to transition for various reasons. In Lois's case, actually, she was quite pressured by her own doctors who just said, well, you should do this because you're depressed. You're going to feel much better if you go through this medicalization. She went through the surgery at the age of 19, I think, and regrets it now. And so it's a very complicated topic. Like, it's not like I just hate everyone who decided to go this way and to transition. They can be good people. So I'll work with anyone who wants to push back against the encroachment on women's spaces and, medicalization of children. That's all that really matters to me.
Yeah, I think we can hate ideas. Mm-hmm. We don't have to hate people. No. Like I've known people I love and care for who held literal white supremacy thoughts when they were younger, believed the white race was superior, and they were literal skinheads, and now are just lovely people. And so, I think, we can hate the ideas, and we don't have to hate the people. And so I think that's that danger, and why I like you talking about individualism versus group identity is when, it seems innocent just to fall back on group identity and natural. It is really natural. I think that's the danger, I think, is how natural it is. But you can cancel people and make them suffer and not care about the individual because you're just looking at the group and how good the group is doing, and the individual gets lost, and we can just torment and suffer and really put people through hell and not care because, well, what's the group looking like?
Oh,
and so, I can really... Yeah.
And then it has hurt when my own side did it. I don't care about the trans activists, like whatever. It's just kind of like impotent rage, but I try not to let it get to me. But when it is kind of your own side, it's not that easy to deal with. So yeah, I know what it feels like.
Yeah, well, good for you for sticking with the principle. I think
Thank you.
It is easy just to like cave into, especially when you're already like feeling homeless, and then you're feeling homeless and twice over. I can imagine that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that must be really odd. I won't keep you too long though, but start to wrap up here. But I just wanted to, where can people find you? Where are you active these days?
I'm active here and there on Twitter, a lot less now that I've got that baby, but you can find me at Eva_Kurilova, so EVAKURILOVA. There I have a link to my Substack, which I do still try to keep up with as best as I can. My output has been less, but I do still write about these topics. I think that there's still a long way to go. I naively thought, kind of when Alberta was introducing the legislation, that, what am I going to write about? I'll have to find some new topic. But I think with the way Canada's going, I think there's still like a lot to push back on, and to kind of end this happening to kids, and to just draw attention to sports, and all sorts of things. Women's prisons are still not being looked at really. Lots of issues to tackle still. So I've definitely, my activism has taken a hit, but I'm still involved. I'm still writing and doing my best.
That's good. Yeah, I can imagine juggling motherhood and writing must be pretty challenging. And unfortunately, I don't like, politics kind of sucks, and it's a dirty place. But at the end of the day, you need political will. We need political will to put change in at some point.
We do.
You do. It is an important piece of the puzzle that can't be ignored. And so. Yeah, well, good on you for all your activism and for staying strong through all this. I know it's not easy. So
thank you.
I really appreciate the work you do. And,
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, appreciate you being on the show. Thank you much, Eva, and look forward to seeing what else you get up to.
Thank you. It was really nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll talk again soon, I hope. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe or share with your friends. Bad Canadians, Working Class Roots, A Free Speech Lens, and Canadian Contrarians.